9. He says, he who has equal regard for the good-hearted, friends, foes, indifferent, neutral, hateful, relatives, righteous and unrighteous, he excels. So this is so the third aspect. So the first he spoke about his own body, mind, intellect. Then he speaks about his relationship to the objects of the world, and he speaks about his relationship to the different beings of the world. So he uses a number of different categories. He has good-hearted, which he describes as the potentially good, evil-minded, the potentially evil, friend, who manifests goodness, foe, who manifests evil, indifferent, who may do good or evil, the neutral, doing neither good nor evil, a relative, those who mean to do good and do it. So those are the sort of people that you'll find on a terrestrial basis. And then he talks about spiritual benefit or harm, the righteous, those who follow the spiritual path and work towards the welfare of the people, and the unrighteous, those who are materialistic and live a selfish life only for their personal welfare. So this basically gives the entire range of human temperaments. Or at least that's what it indicates. What he means when he says he has equal regard, there's an equal vision. Right? So think of it this way. I think it was one of the earlier verses we covered. He talks about this idea of having the capacity to x-ray through the material layers. Think of it this way. Let's say you go to a social gathering and one person's wearing a really expensive shirt and a nice jacket, and another guy's just got an ordinary t-shirt and a jumper, and another person's wearing leather jacket. Irrespective of what their clothing is, you look straight past that. It just does not register to you. What's the person like inside? The guy who's wearing the fancy clothes, he's one of the nicest, most humble guys you've ever met. The guy wearing the humble clothes, he's very arrogant. The person wearing the jacket, whatever. So you x-ray through the clothes and you want to get to the person. What's the person like? That is easy to grasp. The clothing, you view the human being as a human being. You x-ray through the clothing. Or a person is old or young, rich or poor, on your political side of the fence, on the other side of the political fence, your religion, not your religion, etc. You x-ray through that and you say, it doesn't matter, you're still a human being. You x-ray through his nationality, you x-ray through the gender, you x-ray through, I see the human being there. So that's the analogy, right? That's the analogy. So any one of us can understand this, that we can x-ray through your surface temperament and see your humanity. You're a human being, man. And that way we're the same. Human rights are the same for every human, that sort of idea. The self-realized soul, same thing functions, except he goes also beyond your humanness. Self-realized soul x-rays through your material component, your physical component, your emotional, your intellectual, x-rays through everything and sees you as an expression of his own self, of the consciousness. And so views everyone in equal regard in that sense. You're an expression of the consciousness. And so whether you're righteous or unrighteous is irrelevant. There's equal regard. So it's easier to understand when we take a more relative stance. When you look at someone and say that person is unrighteous, what are you referring to? You're referring to their material equipments, specifically the mind and intellect. Right? An unrighteous person, he describes, materialistic, selfish life, only for their personal welfare. Well, that indicates their goals and values. It indicates their attitudes. It indicates the type of actions they perform. It's the material equipments that he looks at and says, okay, unrighteous person. This person has unrighteous tendencies, unrighteous nature. That too is an expression of the consciousness. He's talking about the state of his own existence, what he recognizes there, as it were. So when you look at someone who is who disagrees with your opinions and your politics and your religion and disagrees with your lifestyle and everything else, you look across there and you still see a human being. Your vision, now you might think this guy, you see his behavior and you're disgusted by it. You think he shouldn't do that kind of thing in the world here. But he's still a human being. You're absolutely right. The way that you relate to the person, the actions and the obligations that you have to perform in dealing with him will differ from one to another. But you still have that underlying recognition as a human being I'm dealing with. And so I deal with that person on that basis of their humanness. And so that sort of idea. Same thing with self-realized soul. It's not a feeling as such. It will inform his feelings, but we shouldn't reduce this equal regard as a feeling. Don't reduce it down to a feeling. Okay. But it will definitely influence the feeling that he has. So when he sees someone who is acting in ways that are highly unrighteous, we might see that and be disgusted, and we might be outraged. Self-realized soul might look at that person and just his heart bleeds with compassion. This poor fellow, what can we do to help him? Totally different feeling, but again, it's coming from that equal regard.
So if a self-realized soul has equal vision for all, does this mean that we can predict his reactions?
No, you can't predict how a self-realized person will react, because the reaction is not the self. The self does not react. It's the body, mind, and intellect that react. So is that self-realized person an 85-year-old grandmother? Is that self-realized person a 40-year-old businessman who grew up in the West? Well, if the self-realized soul is an 85-year-old Indian grandmother, then the reaction to any one person's behavior will be very different from a self-realized soul who happens to have been a 40-year-old Western businessman. Totally, very different reaction. So there's no way of determining what a self-realized soul will do, how they will act, because that's not dependent upon the self. That's dependent upon the nature of the vasanas themselves.
But if they've detached from your body, mind, and intellect, does that not have some bearing on how they react?
It's the body, mind, and intellect that react. They, to use the pronoun that you chose, don't react. They don't choose to react. The self does not make choices. The self does not perform actions. The self doesn't make decisions. It's the intellect that makes decisions. It's the mind that has feelings. It's the body which has actions.
But like reducing it into sort of manageable bites. I mean, if I'm self-realized, I would expect myself to not react as emotionally, say, to an unrighteous or dishonest person. You know, I would hope and expect that I would be more objective and I would assess them for who they are, not let them disturb my inner peace, etc. So the closeness I've achieved with my capital S self, the closer I am to my capital S self, the less likely I am to become disturbed by.
You won't be affected, but that doesn't tell you what emotion you will feel. It doesn't tell you what thoughts you will entertain. It doesn't tell you what actions you will execute. All it says is that whatever the body, mind, and intellect do, body will go through its actions and perceptions, the mind will fluctuate through its emotions, intellect will have its thoughts. Whatever they do, according to their specific natures presented in that environment, whatever they do, you're not affected by it.
Okay. So it kind of comes back a month or two ago, we had somehow the discussion evolved to a litigation situation where honor or principle or something creates an obligation in your mind to stand your ground.
Yeah.
And the other analogy we used was the church shooting, where those people were, lauded appropriately for their forgiveness, but they still were committed to seeing the person held accountable for their actions.
Yeah.
So, you know, to use one of your examples, the 40-year-old businessman may outwardly appear to be reacting quite aggressively, like he may lawyer up or do whatever he does, but underneath all that, it's quote unquote just business, and his self is calm and undisturbed.
Yes, but the self is always calm and undisturbed, even if it's someone who's fully caught up in the world and fully deluded. The self is always calm and disturbed, calm and undisturbed. That's always the case. So what you're talking about when the businessman lawyers up and gets outraged, that's just his nature's functioning. But there's no affectation. The self doesn't lawyer up.
But that's what I mean. Like what I'm trying to see is if he's more evolved, he's going to lawyer up and get aggressive more out of a sense of obligation and not feel as agitated, whereas the unevolved similar person is going to lawyer up and take the whole thing personally and be highly agitated, and you know.
Yeah.
So it's a question of the degree to which they identify with themselves, the capital S self, while they're going through whatever actions that they pursue.
Yeah. So if the person identifies with the body, mind, and intellect, then that's the experience that the person will have. The person will be frustrated, the person will be anxious and angry and all the rest of it. To the extent that the person does not identify with the body, mind, and intellect, then that's not being fed anymore. So if it's not an issue, then you deal with it and move on to the next thing that's important. The whole notion of, you know, whether it's something which inflames the person and so on and so forth, it starts with the assumption that it is a big deal. And then how do I deal with that big deal? Actually, it's not a big deal. Someone's done something. What do I have to do? Lawyer up. Okay, lawyer up. Anything else? Not good. And then what else next? You know?
Yeah. So outwardly, and I mean, we also talked once about how Swami might choose to manifest, or you know, just using Swami, you know, he might choose to manifest an emotion like anger as a instructing tool or whatever. So looking at, say, going back to the 40-year-old businessman analogy, you might have the one that's less evolved, the one that's more evolved. The one that's more evolved may choose to put on a game face that's even uglier than the one that's all wrapped up. So like you're saying, objectively looking at them, you have no idea how they're like relative to their evolution, how they're reacting.
No.
But inside, the one who's evolved, as you just said, is just going through, you know, required obligatory actions, whereas the other one is completely in a state of absolute disturbance.
Yeah, they're being driven. They're in the passenger seat. They're being driven by the mind's emotions and everything else, whereas the other person is in the driver's seat. Right. And when they want to take their foot off the pedal and park, they can park. But when you're in the passenger seat, if you want to stop the car, you can't. Someone else is driving. Your own desire, your own ego is driving, and you're being taken for a ride. You don't have the choice to say stop. Yourself is your enemy. Driving like a madman. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I filled up several pages of my new notebook.